And what do Republicans do when they give away a $1.5 trillion tax break to the richest among us? Well, if you're Republicans like they are, you go and turn around and you get ready to do it again. And here to talk about that and the tax situation in general with us now is Frank Clemente. I've known Frank for many years. He's a longtime activist and organizer on the left side of the political space. He is now, and has been since 2012, the executive director of Americans for Tax Fairness, and he joins us now. Frank, thanks for coming on the program.
Great to be here, Richard.
So tell me, you guys have, first of all, before we even get started, where can people find Americans for Tax Fairness?
At americansfortaxfairness.org.
It's like the simplest URL ever.
On Facebook, it's the number 4 Tax Fairness.
Okay. And you've been following the Trump tax story. This guy, as I recall, now my memory may be off, but as I recall, he ran for president saying that he was going to give everybody, especially the middle class, a tax break. Isn't that right? Wasn't that the gist of what he had to say?
Yes. Well, you know, like a lot of things he said, there was what he said, and then there was the truth of what he said. He said he would give everybody a big tax cut. He actually proposed a $5 trillion tax cut. The thing is, if you peeled back the onion, what you saw was most of it was going to the top 1%, and he's in the richest 1%, of course, and most of it was going to big corporations as well.
So basically, after this, what everybody described as a kind of right-wing populist campaign, when it comes to taxes, what I saw come out of Trump and the Republicans on Capitol Hill seems to me like old-school Republican trickle-down favoritism for the rich. It did strike me there was anything different about it. Is that fair?
Actually, what was different was it was actually worse than what Reagan had proposed and worse than what George W. Bush had proposed. And remember, they did 2 very big tax cuts as well, both very early in their terms. Their tax cuts spread the wealth quite a bit more, actually. The middle class got a bigger tax cut out of both Reagan and George W. Bush than they got from Trump. And the reason is Trump's tax cuts, and I say Trump GOP because it's the Republicans in Congress that passed his tax cuts, it was a very large corporate tax cut and business tax cut. And the folks who own corporations and businesses are rich CEOs and rich shareholders. So they didn't just get the tax cut on the individual side, you know, from their wages and salaries. They got a huge tax cut that trickled down to them because of the corporate tax cuts.
So good point. And one of the things that we all wondered about when they passed this tax cut was they seemed to include a few bucks for some working folks. And we thought, well, maybe that'll somehow convince people that this is a better deal for them than it really is. But I'm not seeing, I'm not close to it like you are, but I'm not seeing a big political lift for these guys out of this tax deal for the rich that they passed the first time around. Are you?
No, it's doing very poorly. In fact, we just put an analysis out yesterday. You can get it on our website that shows. We looked at, actually we didn't look at, but these media firms look at how many ads are Republican candidates running, Democratic candidates, and the allied interest groups out there. And of 400,000 ads that have been run since the first of the year, taxes is the most common ad that's being run by Republicans. 30%, 1 out of 3 of their ads are on taxes, but a very small fraction of those ads are actually about the GOP tax law that they rammed through Congress at the end of December. The reason is because it's a stinker with the public. The public didn't like this law before it got passed because they knew that the benefits overwhelmingly went to big corporations and to rich people. And they now understand after 9 months that they're not seeing a bigger paycheck, and they're certainly not seeing their employer give them a $4,000 pay raise. You may remember Trump. came out and outrageously made this statement last year when the bill was being debated that corporations would take their corporate tax cut and give their workers at least a $4,000 pay hike.
Right. That doesn't seem to be happening. And so basically people get that it is, in effect, a broken promise as well as a giveaway to the rich. So now the rational person, if their end game in life was to get elected, and obviously, you know, the motivations of politicians are complex, you'd think what they do is, well, let's not do that again. But in fact, there's another tax scam on the way, or at least being cooked up, right?
Yeah, we call it a tax scam 2, the sequel.
Right.
You know, it was a bad movie the first time around, and it's going to be a bad movie the next time around. This is, it's actually bigger. The first tax cuts that passed in December, you said $1.5 trillion. When all is said and done, it actually is costing $2 trillion because of how much it increases the deficit and then all the added interest costs to pay for that tax cut. This one goes 50% more. This one's a $3 trillion budget buster. And this one is all about individual cuts. It's not about corporate cuts. But most of those tax breaks are going, again, to the wealthiest 5% of the population. It's not going to pass the Senate, but it's going to be voted on in the House next week, the last week of September. We are working very energetically to get people to oppose this legislation. The Republicans, their theory is, their theory doesn't make that much sense to me since they're not running that many ads about the first tax bill that passed, but they're coming back around, and they think if they passed another one in the 4 weeks just before the election, midterm election, then they'll be able to have their candidates go out and boast, well, we just gave you another tax cut.
So you're saying it won't pass in the Senate, but it will pass in the House. So how can they expect to deliver something by Election Day?
Well, they won't actually deliver it. What they will say is that we got it passed in our chamber. McConnell doesn't want to put the thing up for a vote because he doesn't want to give Democrats a chance to possibly vote in favor of it, who are from red states and are in their own tough re-election. I don't think there's a chance of that either. This phase 2 overwhelmingly goes to the rich just as much as phase 1. The most important thing, the RNC, the Republican National Committee, just had a polling firm just did an analysis of what's working and what's not working for them out there, with voters. And their analysis of the tax bill was it is not working because the public understands that they didn't get much from it, if they got anything from it, but more importantly, that it threatens Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education. And that threat is what's driving this debate. That was our core message during this fight, is that they're going to pass this bill. You're not going to get much. The rich and corporations are going to get everything. But on the back end, once this thing blows up the deficit, the Republicans are going to immediately come back and say, see, the deficit's now out of control. We've got to cut all these earned benefits and these services that working families find critical.
You know, I was going to ask you about that because they're already doing that, actually, right? I mean, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, has already come out and said, now he didn't put it this way, but he said, now that we gave away so much money to the rich, now all of a sudden I'm worried about deficits again, so I think we got to cut what they call entitlements.
Yes,
so
he said it right after the bill passed. Larry Kudlow, who's the chief economic advisor for Trump, he was on CNBC earlier this week. He said, we're going to, after the election next year, we're going to come back and try and cut, he calls it entitlements. Folks, what entitlements means is Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, that Trump is going to come back and try and cut those programs. He did that, so the tax bill, the $2 trillion giveaway that passed in December, in February, Trump proposed a budget that cut $3 trillion. Okay, so he wanted to pay for his tax cut. He said, the deficit's now getting bigger. He came in and proposed $3 trillion cuts, of which about half of it was cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, health care.
So, so that's interesting because once you start looking at the taxes as a political issue, you can't get away, I don't think, from the popularity of Medicare and Social Security. Which is, I mean, I was just going to say that I haven't looked at it for a while. You and I, years ago, worked on the Social Security issue together, but the last I looked at the polling, those programs were not only enormously popular with the American voter, they're enormously popular with Republican voters.
They are. Yes, well, I mean, they do not discriminate based on party. I mean, if you paid into Medicare, if you paid into Social Security, you are going to get those benefits. You paid for them, you earned them. And so they are actually, in the polling we do, the popularity is 75, 80%. When we talk about Republicans are proposing a tax plan that is going to result in cuts to these programs, how do you feel about it? The public feels very strongly about two things in this tax debate. The first thing is tax fairness. And a lot of independent voters, and even some Republican voters, they get that the tax system already was skewed in favor of the rich and corporations. It now got more skewed in their favor. And Americans have a basic sense of fairness. It's deep. It's a value for people. And I like to say that when you think about the swamp in Washington and you think about the corruption in Washington, what's kind of target number one, or what's the poster child for that? And I think that it's the tax system, right? I mean, in the tax fight that happened last year, there were 7,000 lobbyists working on the tax issue. Virtually all of them were on the other side. The progressive forces have, a handful of lobbyists, very small number, and they were virtually all registered corporate lobbyists. Now, that 7,000 is 60% of the 11,000 lobbyists here in Washington, D.C. So most lobbyists work on tax issues. Tax issues is the most commonly lobbied thing. It is what is at the center of our corruption here in Washington, D.C.
So and that's a great point, and I agree with everything you said. And I guess as a rounding out point on this, so you have this sort of two-tier political system we live in, right, where here in D.C., lobbyists have enormous sway, and as you say, massively deployed on the tax issue, massively against the public interest. Out there in the broader world of politics, I feel as if somehow the forces of the right have skewed the debate in the media and in the political world by getting us to fixate on the cost of government as opposed to just the costs to households of certain things. So they will tell you how great tax cuts are or government spending cuts are, but they won't tell you how often we get, as people, as citizens, enormous value for our dollar. That taxation isn't just a burden imposed by an alien force. It is something that when we pay in, we get great value back without somebody drawing a profit out of it. Do you get what I'm drawing at?
Yeah, totally.
Driving at?
This is the, I don't want to call it schizophrenia of the public, but it is the challenge that we have, right? On the one hand, the public, the services that the government delivers, Social Security, Medicare, public education, good roads and bridges, affordable health care, the public cares deeply about those things. They often don't really understand how taxes are related to those things. Remember back in the Tea Party days when they said, keep my hands off my Medicare, as if it wasn't a government program. Right. So we have that problem with the public. And that's why I like to say it's two sides of the same coin. The Republican agenda is both small government and low taxes, right? And you get small government by cutting taxes, and they push this button that the government is not on your side, that the government is corrupt, and there is some element that in the polling that we do, the public's their confidence in the government, their trust in the government is not high. I mean, we see what their confidence and trust is in the president. And in Congress, it's even lower in Congress. That is a problem. That's a problem for folks like us who care about the government doing good things, who care about a progressive, proactive investment agenda in the future. We have to not just take on the question of we need to raise a lot more money in order to afford the things we want, like free public college education or Medicare for all or childcare that we all can afford. But we do have to address the public's skepticism and feelings about corruption in government. Now, my view is that you do that by changing who's running the government, by changing who's influencing the government. And, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, I mean, it's so much, in a way, so much of the Democratic Party has been influenced by corporate lobbyists and corporate PAC money running those races. And so we've got to clean all of that out for folks to get right-sized and be on the side of working families 100%.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more on that, Frank Clemente, and I think you guys at Americans for Tax Fairness do a terrific job. A lot of your studies, I rely a lot on a lot of the facts and figures and polling data you pull together. So thanks for all the great work, and thanks for coming on the program.
You bet. Cheers.